I'm going to do a real quick demo in this one. And I was telling some guys that I do these sketches in about 5 minutes and I sculpt them out in about another 5 minutes. It's actually very fast. It's very fun to do. So what we're going to do is head over to 2D. And you can see these were just quick sketches. They're basically thumbnails or like dirty napkin sketches. And you can use any kind of brush you want to sketch these out. I'm just going to use a soft round, a little bit larger perhaps, turn my brush smoothing down there. And like I was saying, they're more or less something like napkin sketches. So when you see me doing this kind of like doodly action here in some of my videos, it's really just about trying to find shapes and forms and using kind of these like seeking lines, if you would, to try to figure out what I'm doing here. And I can always go back and I can erase things. Like if something doesn't look quite right, I could change them up perhaps as well, right? So we can just do all this kind of fun stuff like this. And if you make your sketches too complicated, it's going to take longer to sculpt. So these projects, they can go from a total of like 10 minutes maybe, but they can definitely start going into the hours if you're making very complex designs and forms and stuff like that. So you want to take your time to, get kind of interesting, cool shapes. I'm looking at about usually 3 breakups, right? That's usually the case. So we're looking at like 3 sub shapes, if we would. And that's it. That's all I usually am trying to achieve with it. I might do some hard edges. I might do some that are more soft or whatever the case. Generally, they're more soft. It's easier to work with, but get something like this going anyways. You can see in a minute, 35 seconds, we're done. If we were just doodling like crazy, we can do a whole sheet and like maybe like, I don't know, 60 of them in an hour or something like that. And then we just go back through with a hard round brush. You pick the ones that you like the most, obviously, and work on those. But we use a hard round brush with gray, maybe a little bit of brush smoothing. We can go back and we can, fluctuate these a little bit. I like to change the silhouette slightly sometimes and just work them out anyways. Just doing the silhouette here. I'm going to round this little corner here so it's a little bit softer. Again. And that's all it takes, guys. So like within, just 2 minutes, you're already going on to the fill usually. You can fill it with a fill bucket, set it to grow by 1, and then you're pretty much good to go there. You can drop the opacity of the sketch if you want so it's not as distracting. Turn on alpha lock, use a soft round brush, such as the airbrush here in Krita. And now what I'll do is I'll use a lasso tool and I'll go in here and I'll try to lasso out certain areas. And I'm just going to make them a little darker in this area. All right. And then over here, I might make this a little darker in this area. So we're going to end up with like kind of these main areas that are broken up anyways. Some of these I might need to just shade freely. I'll turn my brush smoothing down now. I'm using Lazy Nezumi for brush smoothing. Really good because what happens is that we can set up hotkeys for it so I can switch the brush smoothing on and off very fast. So this little area down here, we can add additional lighting or shading. And I'm thinking of these as something like ambient occlusion maps almost, or like height maps maybe. So I just do a little dusting there with the soft round to give it some form, a little bit more shape. And I can work that out. This got a little too dark. I wanted to keep it a little bit, or a little too light, excuse me. I wanted to keep it a little bit darker maybe. You can see how that works out very quickly like that now. So we can go through here and we can just continue to refine. Super easy. We can do new layers if we need to and use clipping groups and all that. But for my purposes here, I'm just going to try to keep this somewhat fast. Not really liking the shape on top. I think it's just a little bit odd or a little bit off. And we can try to push it in and out of the surface a little bit and see if that gives it a little bit better of a result. Try to like resharpen this edge a little here. Yeah, because the silhouette there, I think, is just not working out too well. But for the most part, yeah, you can see where this is kind of going now. And so we're about at 5 minutes now, and that's all you need to spend on these sometimes. If you made them more complicated, your project will run from 10 minutes to, however, who knows how long. It can definitely end up a much longer project to sculpt if you try to make them too complex with too many details and surface changes. Like I'm not sure what to even do back here in this area right now, but turn those lines down even further and see if it just looks okay. I don't want them to run together a little bit. Yeah, so basically at this point, we're just rendering more or less very quickly. It's adding a little bit of depth to it. And yeah, we got to find that balance, for the shading anyways. But yeah, we're at 5 minutes. So let's just continue with this and we'll can see where it goes or ends up. Let's do, normally you'd save your image out, crop it if needed. I'm going to Control Shift C it with a lasso select. And we'll go to Blender. I'm going to Control Shift V. I have the paste image add-on, so it comes in like so. Paste image add-on does not always work the way you think it should, maybe. If you've saved the Blender file already, it should be saving a subfolder with all these images. But if not, you want to go ahead and file external resources and pack resources, and I'll save the image in the Blender file. Just save your Blender file, right? And now we got this going. I can just pull it back a little. You start with a cube or a sphere. It's really up to you. I'm just going to go into sculpt mode, hit R, Control R, and remesh, and that's going to give us that, right? So I could just start pulling this out right away if I wanted to. I'm going to use what's called, I call grab through, which is the grab brush with set to projected. I can just start pulling it around all the way through the shape as opposed to just the surface level. Something like this, that's fine. We can also mesh filter smooth. If you had remeshed too high, it doesn't smooth as fast. Keep that in mind, just click and drag to the right. Now we can use the grab tool again and get this laid out more correctly. And try to get it all nudged into position at least. And you do want to kind of slow down sometimes and, just make this look as well as you can anyways. You still want to adjust the width, so do scale things accordingly. And you can use the sculpt ones for that. You don't necessarily have to do it in like edit mode, but you can also use your edit mode tools, obviously. You can also use a regular lasso trim here. You can use Lazy Nizumi if you have it in Blender as well. So if I want to go through and have a little bit of smoothing on my trim tool here, I can do that, right? You can see, you can just get in here, cut things up as best as we can at least, and get all the right silhouette going at the minimum. You can see how that all starts to work out. Oops, we probably could keep that in the back, couldn't we? Let's use the grab tool. Sometimes you got to hit Control R and remesh. I have to make that a little bit bigger now. Just nudge it back into place a little bit. And this is pretty much it, guys. Like, this is all we really have to do to get started. Now we can use a mask through, same idea. You set mask tool to projected. And we can get in here with brush smoothing even. We can crank the resolution up a little bit better to get a nicer mask. Hit Control R, remesh. We'll take that section out right there real quick, like that. So this one, we could just invert. We can use the scale. We can push it in. It's going to be a little bit janky at first. That's okay. But that's all we got to do there. I mean, this is really not like rocket science or anything, right? So top one as well. I'm going to push this in a little bit, but I'm not sure if I want to just use a scale on this one. Although we could. I think I'm going to just sculpt it a little bit, all right? So we create the mask as best as we can. Use a regular one now. Regular mask tool with spacing and all that. Turn that brush smoothing down for just a second. On the borders, it might work out better if you want to do that, right? I should have symmetry on for X as well, which I didn't. I might have to symmetrize real quick, positive X, negative X in this case. I already had set up, but you can start to see where this all might end up going anyways. And it's really kind of just a fun, fast way of doing things here, just to get a basic primitive shape going. You can see we're at like 9 minutes now, and it takes a little bit longer to actually sculpt, but you could definitely, if you're not careful, you make something too complex, it's going to take even longer to do for the sculpt at least. So just going to push these in a little bit. I think maybe a little bit lower strength, just using the draw tool, just nudging things around a little bit. We can smooth them as well after we do all that. And we still, maybe we want to invert. Maybe we want to like push this area in a little bit right here. Could also try using the scrapers. So there's always fair game to use other tools. Scraper. You could try to scrape it down and then smooth it maybe. Always a possibility. Now I want to change this so that it all has a taper going towards the front. So what I'm going to do is go to edit mode, or excuse me, into object mode, and I'm going to use a lattice modifier. the modifier list add-on, you click this little button and you can add a little break there. And now you can grab all these front handles, scale on say X, you see? So lattice tools, you apply and you delete. Very good for doing things like this. It's not really that hard to use the lattice tools anyways. You can see we're now at 10 minutes almost exactly, right? So if I wasn't explaining this, I can actually do this a little bit faster and with a little bit more clear thought on what kind of shapes and forms I'm wanting to create anyways. But I would have definitely been a little bit more ahead than I am now. Trying to explain it along the way slows you down, but not too bad either way, right? Because we're pretty close to where I want to be. And I like this. I like to soften things up a little bit usually. So either I smooth them with that or I mesh filter smooth and do this number. So this area in the middle could definitely use a little bit more finesse. Obviously, it's not quite perfect. Just use a regular draw tool, low strength, maybe get in here and just start working it until it looks, you know, the way you imagined it looking. Because I think this is too wide. And so I really kind of want to like push this whole area in a little bit. And that grab tool might be able to pull this off. We'll see. You see? Super useful way of working. You can always use crease sharps as well. And you can increase the resolution a little bit. You might mesh filter smooth it, take it down a little like that. And then you can use crease sharps and go back and try to finesse things as well. So with some brush smoothing, you can hit Shift S in Vanilla Blender. Turn on the stabilized stroke if you don't have Lazy Nizumi. You don't need it necessarily, but it's kind of fun to have sometimes. It does mess up the... it doesn't always work correctly with the UI as far as like the buttons go, right? Like the sliders, Lazy Nizumi kind of messes up the sliders in Blender, so you have to turn it off usually. So it's not a perfect solution, but it's still pretty good ultimately. And you see, we can just make little fine-tuned adjustments now at this point. And we can spend all day doing that, obviously, if we're not careful. So, but we can definitely detail it up a little bit more if we need to. I try to leave these a little bit intentionally vague. This was just something I was doing for a little side project. You know, I was doing a lot of this kind of stuff. Use regular masks tool now. Get in here. Maybe we add some additional detail. Oop, I did not want to erase all that. But yeah, something like that maybe. Now we just go in, we fill it all in. Make sure we got it all. And we can increase contrast a bit just to turn auto off. Just so that's going to fill in those transparent little mask sections a little bit better, hopefully. We can invert it and we could do a inflate. We could do inflate, or we could also move. And the move tools, you can do sculpt, set pivot, set under cursor. Shift right click this, add it to shift right mouse if it isn't by default. I think they did it by default now. But you can move that around. So if I want to do like to here, I can scale to there, right? To the back then. And we'll get that kind of result going. This is going to be a little bit janky. Just remesh it, clear the mask, use the smooth tool. I actually would recommend using the smooth tool the more I play around with this. I find that you can use the smooth tool, just kind of low strength, and come in here and just nudge up all these side surfaces quite well. And then you can knock off the edges a little bit to get those looking nicer. And if you need more resolution to make all that happen cleaner, you know, do it. But basically, you just finesse it at this point, right? And so you'll go through this, no problem. You know, we're at 13 minutes now, and we already have some kind of shape going that we could possibly put to work, perhaps. We use this as a starting point for either more sculpting detail, or we can use it as just a very vague, rough, kind of like kit bash piece, things like that, you know? If we were going to go ahead and turn this into like a subdivision mesh, the best method is definitely doing a manual retopo. But I like to oftentimes just try to see what quad remesher spits out as well. If I'm going to use it as a base sculpt with a multi-res, for example, that could work out really well too, potentially. So, see, like I just want to raise the surfaces a little bit in one area, smooth out the border next to it. Boom. All right. So that's it pretty much for this demo. Like we'll go to quad remesher now. I'm using mostly the default settings, no adaptive size, close to the original quad counts. And so if I just quad remesh it, might come out so-so. You might want to shade it smooth too and try it with shade smooth on. See if it gives you a different result. Yeah, they're going to come out a little bit soft always, I think. It's just kind of the way it works. But it's something to look at, and it's, this is how I was trying to get some ideas up and running, just figuring out, what it might look like in 3D, and add a little bit more shape and form to it. I could definitely refine it still at this point and do more crease sharps and clean it up at this point. And it's really a good base mesh. So I'm not going to do a bunch of hard surface sculpting in this one, but basically you create shapes like this very fast, right? It's pretty easy. And then later on, you can refine them more, right? If you want to do that with voxels, you can do it with the multi-res. And in this case, you can see I can start doing some additional sculpting on it, and I can come up with like really sound kind of designs or concepts anyways, and I see where I want to take these things at some point, But if you do use a voxel mesh and you continue sculpting like this, it's going to get a little bit hard to manage. You might want to sculpt layers out on, possibly. It doesn't really help much on voxels usually because you're oftentimes trying to remesh things anyways, so you can't remesh your mesh with the sculpt layers out on. And it doesn't always work out very well on multi-reses either. Sometimes Blender loses like its vertex order or something, and it messes up that add-on. And so, but you can push them. And that's all I'm trying to prove a point here is like, without any additional sculpting, with additional sculpting, you get the idea now, right? You can do some insane things with it if you really wanted to. Now to do this proper over, because like obviously, it is a multi-res. We could technically bake this to a low poly model. It's not really a big issue. But you might want to, if you're going to take this project further, it is going to be more complicated than this, perhaps. Obviously, these are like abstract shapes that they're not doing much here as far as like describing an actual thing. But if we did want to push this further on a more official 3D model, we'd end up retopoing this manually, right? It doesn't have to be a huge process necessarily. You can select one face off of the original mesh, use the machine tools add-on, select that face, hit 4. That's a smart face feature. Now you can just get in here, turn on your retopo shading in edit mode. And you can get in here and start snapping to face project, align rotations to target. But basically, at this point, you retopo manually, and that's usually your better option. Because now you keep these simple too. You're going to do holding edges like you normally would with regular traditional subdivision modeling. But you just start doing the big forms or big shapes, and then just start working it out, basically, right? Make it all nice, smooth, and curvy, and get the topology correct. You don't get away from the idea of creating correct topology. You have to be able to know how to run these surfaces together, where you're going to split them, how the edges are going to hold, and all that fun stuff, and do redirects, and manage your poles and things like that. So you don't get away from that. Like if I need more edges in here or whatever, I have to do it possibly, right? We can still try to use creases to get to a higher density mesh, but a lot of times you won't be able to. So you're going to have to just nudge things around. And there can be some like really problematic areas when you're retopoing, especially hard surface type stuff. So just keep that in mind. It's not always going to go flawlessly or perfectly. You can see you can construct things in any number of different manners here where we're just doing fills now and fill that. And you can see this is kind of a quad here almost, but it's probably not the topo we need for that area. So you can fill it for now. Run an additional edge out later on, maybe. Who knows? That'll start to work it more. And then we can run this around, dissolve. So you're still sub-D modeling at the end of the day. It's just more forgiving because you already have the base form, and that's all you're trying to do is try to create that mesh, right? So don't be afraid of retopo, guys. It happens for hard surface too. It's not just for characters and organic things, or anything that you're trying to create and where you think that like maybe sculpting is the better way of going at first and trying to figure out your shapes or your forms, right? And really, so we're only at 20 minutes now, and we kind of went well beyond that base mesh example. Now we're retopoing for whatever reason, but you get the idea, right? You do not have to be afraid of this software and modeling and sculpting. All of it's possible to transition from one kind of workflow to the other. It's kind of an overused term, right? Like workflows, like subdivision workflow or sculpting workflow. Or no, it's all modeling tools at the end of the day. So like if you do a sculpt first and you have to rework the topo, it's just retopology. That's all it is. It doesn't matter if you're doing what I'm doing right now or if you're just modeling around it even, right? Like it's all the same thing basically. But before you know it, we would end up with a nice mesh that can actually subdivide Like I was saying, we possibly use creases as well to hold some edges a little bit sharper. We might do like a subdivision of 1 or 2 and then apply that with those in that manner. You might have to balance things too, ultimately, because this is, at the end of the day, a subdivision mesh. Okay. It's not a sculpt. It's not just place the polygons on the surface and it might work out perfectly. It's a subdivision mesh. We still have to take into consideration all of our basics when it comes to topology fundamentals and things like that. So if like I need another edge in here, I need another edge. There's nothing I can do about that, right? Because you can see it's kind of warping here at the bottom a little bit, a little weird. So if I got to fix that, I'm just going to add that extra detail and then move on. If I need this a little bit sharper, I might have to do a holding edge or an additional edge to create that kind of density in that area at least. Sometimes you got to, work topology flows around in different directions. That's fine. I want this one to come out to about there. Okay. So all of these are going to there. That's what I wanted. And so now we can do that and we can run this one back out this way maybe or something. And you can see we end up with a quad, a little bit of a weird situation there with that pole like that, but it might work out. It might not. In our case, it kind of looks like it deforms a little bit oddly. We try pulling it out a bit. Maybe that'll help stop that. So it's about balance too. E-poles on surfaces aren't always, like curves isn't always what you want, but a lot of times it happens and it's just something you can't avoid sometimes. So, but basically we can work any of those designs into something that we want. We can even, use them as a base just to start a new kind of mesh perhaps, That's a little like, let's turn subdivision off a second in it. Well, I know it's hard to see with the retopo shading, but I'm trying to just keep moving. Then I'm going to flick that thing off. But I think you get the idea. We can, in fact, do this, right? Not impossible. Balance things. You can actually turn subdivision on in edit mode sometimes. And let me turn that off, actually. And you can balance the surfaces without worrying about that base mesh. The low poly mesh that you kind of retopo, or the actual mesh, like when subdivision's off, this is just a cage. It's a control mesh. It's not the end result. Usually when you're doing subdivision modeling, the end result is more important, right? So if you have to nudge things around, do not be afraid of doing that. If it makes it look nicer with the subdivision on, then you do that, okay? But you can see we've managed to work this out, at least this one little section. Now to do the whole thing, the more complicated it is, obviously, the more time you're going to spend doing this. And that's where you run into a lot of issues because it's very easy to get overwhelmed doing a whole piece. So you'd start working panel to panel, perhaps in this case. But in other cases, you can't always get away with that. And it's got to be more of a unified shape. So just keep that in mind. But yeah, basically we can work little section to section and come up with some pretty decent results off of it, right? So yeah, have some fun with this, guys. If you want to use these kinds of techniques, it certainly is doable. A lot of people like to do concept sculpts that are something like this even a little bit, but maybe not with multi-reses. They might use voxels and they just sculpt a bunch of cool stuff out. And then they go through and then they start modeling on top of it, basically. But you can think of it just as a guide mesh, right? Like it's just guiding to what you're trying to do or achieve. So if you make this look the way you want it to look, that's good. Because then you just retopo it and you're done after, right? Like you got a subdivision mesh. It's good. There's nothing wrong with that. If you really want to push it, if you can do these high enough detail with like clean, crisp edges and everything else that you want, the way you want it to look, you can just bake these to a low poly. So you don't have to necessarily even retopo them like that. A low poly retopo is much, much easier than a high poly retopo because it's literally the same process, right? Like we get in here and we use the same retopo shading. But depending on, how much detail you're trying to hold onto these surfaces, I don't know why this one's, okay, it was like lagging or something. Depending on how much detail you're trying to hold, you don't retopo low poly always the same way as you would retopo high poly. We're talking about just big swaths of section here. It's so much faster to do this potentially. And you can tweak that setting so it goes a little bit higher here on the retopo. Yeah, low poly retopo is way, way faster. So the ultimate goal, I think, for a lot of artists in Blender, at least for myself, is just to kind of use it as almost like a ZBrush replacement so that we can do things like this, We just use that sculpt almost outright. Maybe we do a quick, dirty retopo like this. or low poly, and then we're freaking done if we can make that happen, you know? This will end up becoming our bake mesh. Unless there's any reason we need to cut out these surfaces here, it's a lot easier to do, you know? So you just do like loop cuts and let snap to the surface. And sometimes you gotta be careful with the snapping because you might fall into a hole or something, but it's really not that crazy, ultimately. Use like the F2 add-on. And you can see, like, if that doesn't hold the silhouette quite right, you know, you can add additional loop cuts. This is where maybe you start thinking about using things like shrink wraps and stuff as well. So that way you don't always have to place them manually on the surface every time. But if you need more resolution, you need more resolution. And as a result, we get a little bit of a better curve here. Want some more in there as well. But that's a low poly retopo, guys. It looks completely different, right? Like, it's similar, but you don't technically need to use quads. You could use triangles or n-gons or whatever. As long as it shades correctly and it looks, you know, it captures the silhouette, you're golden. So that's all I wanted to show in this video. I think real quick demo for you guys. I know it's still a 25-minute video, but yeah, the base of this only takes 10 minutes, you know, if you want it to. Most of these were done in 10 minutes. I think this one was like a 15. This one was the most complex for sure. I was having a hard time with these curves here back because, you know, it's just extra little forms and that eats up more time, but I was like a 20, I think, right? So a lot of these were 10s though. This one was surprisingly easy to do as well. So, and then of these types of sculpts can take, you know, hours if you let them anyways. So that's just something, you know, that's a little bit harder to do, obviously, because it's very hard to get these just right. And I mean, some of this came in very soft, and you'll see an example right here. So like, it can come in very soft on the initial sculpts, and then you have to like sharpen edges, which is a real pain. And you'd have to do that across all of this now, because I just used a blurry mask by accident when pushing that in. And that's not going to cut it. You don't want to use, I wasn't high enough resolution, basically. Multi-res is you can crank up and down resolution while you're sculpting and get different results out of it. But yeah, so you see, like, it's a lot harder to work out later on if you don't get it right the first time. So, and there's some caveats to this. There's a lot of like drawback to sculpting everything. It would be much better, I think, to model a lot of it. You might initially sculpt it like this and then retopo it. And, you know, the model is where I'd probably try to get these crispier and sharper and stuff like that, as opposed to the sculpt. But in a very direct type of workflow, you might just, you know, knock this out as high detailed as you can, sculpt it to near perfection, and just bake it. I mean, it's a thing, all right? And the bake mesh isn't what you think it is. It's literally this same mesh without the multi-res. Right? So let's turn that snapping off real quick. And like that initial shape here, like this, is more or less the bake mesh. Now this one should actually be lower poly, but there's all kinds of different ideas on how you work with these things. You could technically bake a crazy decimated mesh as well, and it would work out. As long as it's smooth shaded, it'll probably work out just fine. And a lot of these little discrepancies in the normals here will actually get repaired almost from this one, with the normal map baked into it. Kind of combines their normal maps and shading together. It's kind of weird, but yeah, that could happen. And so like, if I wanted to demo this real quick, I was going to end the video, but let me just demo this idea real quick. I'm going to apply that decimate from my user interface back on. Geez, I want to turn that retopo shading off. So like, having a really nice symmetry line in this case would be great. So I can just select it. I'm using Mesh Machine to click, alt click, right? Boom. I'm just going to add a seam down the middle so we don't get too complicated here with unwrapping. That's not necessarily maybe the best way to unwrap this, but in our case, you know, I can unwrap, do minimal stretch, check it with the checker map, Alt S these with the UV toolkit add-on. You can see, like, they're not going to line up perfectly, obviously. It's very smooth and stuff. I just want the checker map to look mostly okay, right? And that's a low poly if you need it to be. Like, that's the absolute minimum job you can do. But it's you'll see how it works out here in a second. We're going to go to Marmoset. We'll just throw it in Marmoset real quick. I do have to get Marmoset's loaded at least. I do have to apply this one. I'm going to duplicate it again. I'm going to apply it. Pull it out for just a second. I still want to decimate this one. I'm going to turn decimate off because it's heavy density. I'm going to hit 0.5 and then I'm going to apply it. It's going to reduce it a little bit, but the shading shouldn't look any different basically. Okay, usually 0.5 works out real well for these ones. Might take a second. A decimate should have a little bar that says it's decimated. There should be like a little, this thing is taking place, because sometimes Blender likes to act like it freezes up and it'll say end the program. Windows will think you need to end it when it's still calculating things. So when it does do that, sometimes hit cancel and just wait a little bit longer. And if it doesn't work, then just end it, you know. You can see that decimate took a little while, right? But it's going to take us from whatever it was, like 7, I think it was, down to 4 million or whatever the case. Like we can do another one if we needed to. Like let's just say your system just can't hang with this when baking. You can do another 0.5 and you can apply that one. You'd be surprised how much you can decimate things sometimes. You don't want to get too carried away, but I do want to get it down to 2 million-ish, I think, on this particular piece would work well. And it's a single core operation, so it's slow anyways, because it's just like collapsing the smallest edges is what it's doing. But yeah, you can see we're down to, what are we at now? Basically 2.2 and 2.2 mil triangles. Yeah, so we can take this, align this to this. We don't need that checker map no more, so let's do a removal. You can see how close they match now. Now, obviously, this might be an okay mesh for something like Nanite in Unreal Engine. 3000 is really not that crazy. You could probably even take it higher than this, to be honest. But let's just say it was a low poly that we retopoed and it was proper and it wasn't this, all right? This is like the cheapest, fastest workflow you could possibly use, but let's just say it was. And so it's pretty smooth overall, and we might have some inflation issues. Basically, what the Cajun Marmoset's going to do is it's going to do something like Alt-S, like this, and it might be offset even. So it's going to inflate like this, right? In our case, I think it'll be fine. See, it's inflating. It's not too bad, but sometimes your inflation will like cross edges over each other, and it can get kind of nasty. So you got to be careful with that for the auto cage setup anyways. But we do need to rename these, and I'm going to actually grab them both. I'll move them to a new collection. Just call it our object for now. I know where to find them. This is going to be the, we'll say object underscore high. This will be object underscore low. We can take both of these and we're going to export an FBX file. Actually, we should triangulate it. Oh, actually, we don't need to. We'll just export it. We'll be fine. That decimate does a pretty interesting job. Just call it OBJ. Selected objects only. Excuse me, did I export an OBJ? FBX. Our object, or OBJ FBX. Okay. All right, I'm losing my mind, guys. We're going to go through to Quick Bake. And now we can just use a quick loader, bring it in here, select the file. It should be good to go. It should come in with a low looking like this. We can click preview, set a folder. This is Marmoset 4. Of course, Marmoset 5 has been updated. It's a little bit different, but not too much anyways. You can see it kind of tries to do an instant bake here. It might not come in quite right, so just keep that in mind. I do want to add ambient occlusion. I want to play around with the cage here in a second, but I'm going to click bake again with that ambient occlusion. You see it doesn't show up. I'm going to click preview again and probably set the materials up again. All right. Now we can go to the low and we can change the max offsets if needed, right? Because the offset was a little bit too low in that case, maybe. We can play around with the min offset as well. And then just go back to the bake project and rebake. And it's really that fast. So like I was saying, these things can be baked. It's not impossible to do this. I'm going to make it just a little bit metallic, and you can see the surface details here. Really, like you're going to have a hard time seeing any discrepancies in this, right? Like they're here, but they're just very hard to see sometimes. You might have to do like skew correct. Well, in our case, the low poly mesh was fairly dense. right? It wasn't quite entirely as low as it could go. So we're probably gonna have to do like any skew corrections or anything on it. But if it was a much lower poly mesh, there would be, maybe a little skew correction action we have to do. You can't really see the seam down the middle either. So that's kind of nice. Of course, running the seam into crevices and areas would be really nice, but that requires a little bit of custom work perhaps. So you'd find that a number of models, believe it or not, that you've seen out there, whether you download them from Fab or Polyhaven or wherever, a lot of times the simplest UV mapping solution is sometimes the easiest or the even maybe the most correct in some situations. Because we only got one seam going down the top and the middle. It's actually easier to process that than having a bunch of extra seams all over the place. But anyways, that's not saying that that's a entirely correct way of doing things or an entirely wrong. But there are certain objects where a center seam actually is a thing, right? In this case, I think a center seam worked out pretty well. Although we could definitely, maybe do it different and whatever the case, right? So, but it bakes, and that's the whole point of this video, guys. I just wanted to show you. You start a basic thing fast. When you can be fast, be fast. When you have to slow down, you have to slow down. There's nothing you can do about that. You have to create that fidelity or that finesse to those surfaces or models or whatever. But you can do it, and so from back here, nobody's going to question this thing and how it was made. Remember, the point of game models is to create a game model, not to create like a perfect high poly subdivision mesh necessarily. It's about, does it shade correctly? Can you bake those normals onto that low poly? And would it look right? Does it match? Does that low poly and high poly match well enough that it bakes well, right? So that's kind of the crazy thing about it. A lot of you guys are overthinking this process. Create simple projects like this, and it seems complex, but try something simple like this. Try baking it, and you'll be surprised what you can get away with. 100%. Like this, we're not even using floaters on this. We're not doing anything special here. It's just straight sculpting, right? It's quite simple, and in essence, anyways. Like it's not necessarily simple to get good at sculpting this kind of. It's hard to sculpt hard surface in Blender, but it is possible. I'm just kind of showing you that, and hopefully this inspires some of you guys to actually think about 3D a little bit different. It doesn't have to be this like slow clickety process always. There are times that like you can go extremely fast with certain things, certain types of shapes or forms, mix it up with sculpting, mix booleans into all this as well, because they're quite useful. Because you can always boolean a voxel mesh, and you can use voxel meshes as like literally clay. You can kind of trim them up with booleans and do all kinds of fun stuff. So instead of like using a mask for all this, you might just model it and then boolean it out. You don't have to always use masks and push the surfaces around and quote unquote sculpt it. No, use booleans, use other subdivision meshes. Like you can do a subdivision mesh and boolean it out of this. You see where we're going? It's all, you can mix and match it quite a bit. And the real secret there, anytime you have dirty topology or just not super clean topology, you can remesh, or like you can retopo it, right? Or you can try to remesh it and see if that works. But with like quad remesher, doesn't always work out, but you can definitely retopo it, and then you just have some fun. You can imagine doing a more complex object than this. It's not going to be one solid piece of geometry either. You're going to have multiple sub objects. So each little object will end up doing the same number, right? And that's how you create a really crazy looking sci-fi rifle or things like that. You just, you break it into little parts, pieces, and components, and then you go through and you either work low poly to high poly where you start sculpting on the low poly, or you just kind of create like a base mesh and retopo it, and maybe, or create a base mesh, sculpt on it, retopo it, and then you got kind of both at the same time if you wanted it. It's all kinds of ways of mixing this workflow up, though. It's not like just because I say one thing that like that's how it always goes. Even certain sub objects on a model, what ends up happening is those sub objects can have different workflows, right? Like you don't always do everything exactly the same necessarily. So when you're watching some time lapses from guys putting together like these really amazing looking models, look for that in those time lapses where they are switching the workflow up. Like sometimes they might start with the sculpt, sometimes they start with poly modeling, right? And they go back and forth. They might do a poly model and turn it into subdivision, or they might just use creases and then subdivide that, and it's kind of a dirty subdivision mesh. Other times they're just voxel sculpting, doing booleans, and then they're just maybe remeshing and smoothing it out and just baking it. You know, they might not even be doing subdivision at all, or any combination of this. Like, so all three of the different ideas here, you can kind of mix together. This is why I keep saying, I keep telling you guys, listen, think of these as tools, not workflows. All right. I know I said it in the past, and a lot of other people have said it in YouTube videos that there's like subdivision workflow, sculpting workflow. No, no, no. Use them as tools. It's just poly modeling, right? Sculpting is a type of modeling when it comes down to it, right? Now, of course, it has a little bit more interesting use cases that are more similar to traditional sculpting, perhaps. But at the end of the day, you're still pushing vertices in and out with the sculpt tool. So it's like a soft selection type of deform, basically. It's not really anything special when you really look into it. It just feels a little bit more artistic, and it gives you, more control with like a pin than poly modeling ever would, right? So, but it's definitely, it's kind of its own little workflow to some degree. But when you start really thinking about it, like, and you start playing around with like just straight poly modeling, block out meshes, doing beveled meshes, mid poly type workflows, things like that, and then you start working with the sculpting tools, you realize at a certain point, like all of this works together to some degree. And if the topo isn't the way you want, there's retopo. And that's the bridge right there. Retopo is the bridge between one mesh and the other. Okay. So, but you lose control on like sculpts to some degree because you don't no longer have edges to select and bevel, right? So you have to learn how to bevel using the sculpt tools. That's where a lot of guys get confused. Like there's a different strategy to working with it, but it's basically the same thing. It's the same concept or ideas anyways. It's just a little bit different, obviously. A little bit more like drawing and less like poly modeling, right? Cool work to get knocked out though this fast. Like, this still only took like an hour. It's not really, you can imagine this just being used as one part of a bigger complex thing. And when it's this size, nobody really cares about all that detail anymore. So this is why trying to keep them a little bit simpler goes a long way. Right now, if this was a rifle and it was in your screen and you're like creating like the next version of the needler for Halo or something, who knows? You can see like the overall like smooth curvy shapes and stuff. It's not bad, but there's going to be details that you want, obviously, kind of as separate meshes where like this is pushed in a little bit further and creates a nice little edge in there, as opposed to it just being baked in there, like that. So that's when you would start splitting things up. But for a concept piece, like if you can knock this out real fast and start creating concepts, this is perfect for painting over. You can actually, you don't even have to bake it necessarily, just render it. And then you paint over it, and you can do turnarounds and throw some textures on there and do a material call out and everything else, right? And set up scene lighting and everything else, put it in a kind of an environment that you've concept modeled or whatever, and you got it. It's going to be dense. You need a pretty beefy rig if you're going to do lots of this. But at least on some bespoke things, it would work out pretty well, generally speaking. So, and we're just spinning in circles now. But yeah, so it was supposed to be a quick little demo, I guess 10-minute, 13-minute demo or whatever. But yeah, I get carried away sometimes in my videos, guys. So I know it's going to be kind of like a running theme or joke at some point that, this is going to be a quick video. No, it's 40, what are we at now? 43-minute video. So yeah, it's going to be one of those things where that happens quite a bit, I think. But anyways, that's it for this video. I will check you guys out in the next one. All right. Take care.